Twitter space of at Hello Future Buzz. And I'm your host, Elizabeth Chase. And today we have with us Debra Farber, who is the data protection gurus professional with Hedera. And mostly, I guess you focus on guiding regulators in an enterprise level and dealing with that. And we also have Tom with us from Everywhere, based in the UK. And our listeners might know Tom. And then Charles is the founder and creator of what is it, End Games, Charles?
Yeah, End Game Studios.
Okay. So I know that everyone is really excited about having the number one trending person on Hedera this week, Debra.
That was never my intention, but I'm glad to see that it's been successful.
Well, it's well deserved. There's a big buzz about privacy in general, and we're really happy that everyone is getting aware of what Hedera brings to the table in terms of privacy. And today I'd like to let everybody, all of our listeners, know that privacy is so important, and Hedera can solve that issue on a number of different levels, which we'll get into, from social networking to enterprise level. And so I guess what I'd like to start with is sort of just Debra, you talking a little bit about your work at Hedera, and also trying to help our listeners relate to what the real everyday people using Hedera are going to be benefiting from, even in terms of the enterprise using Hedera as a security layer.
Sure. So the first part of that was, okay, my role at Hedera. So yeah, I only joined at the beginning of June, so it's been exactly 1 month today that I've been working with Hedera, and it's actually on a contract basis, and I'm not full time. But generally, they engaged me to, I have pretty wide privacy, security, risk, enterprise kind of network when it comes to, like my LinkedIn, or, I've been in B2B privacy, security, and governance for over 16 years. So when I got really excited about Hedera, when I discovered it only like 2 months ago, quite honestly, I've dived pretty deep for, only learning about it like 3 months ago. I just started, wanting everybody to know about it. So I just did a lot of social media posts, but really keying my my perspective to the audience that I know, which is the privacy, data protection, security, governance space. And I think that, Christian Zenobia, took notice of that. And I had left Amazon to fully focus on privacy tech full time. And I view that as any company that's either solving privacy problems directly with what their, what the tech does by as its main goal, or privacy first companies, and those are companies that have some other goal to bring to market something that they wanted to make sure they put all of the protections and build privacy in by design, and potentially even using privacy engineering principles. So getting away from this, we're going to protect data with policies and procedures, and which is all needed within an organization, but really wanted to finally work on innovation where rubber's hitting the road and you're actually protecting personal data and achieving privacy beyond breach. So very often people in my world would conflate breaches with being the, that's the end all of privacy, is to have security, right, to prevent the breaches. And it's like, nah, that's where privacy and security overlap on the concept of you need confidentiality controls to enforce privacy goals. So at Hedera, what I'm working on right now is I'm creating a white paper that is going to serve really as my platform for speaking opportunities and external, engagement to really spread the message that will resonate with enterprises as well as, startups, right? The great thing is, in building an enterprise grade DLT solution, everyone who is able to use it benefits. It's the same price, right? It's a fraction of a cent for any transaction, no matter who's using Hedera. So, so I'm excited about the longevity of the company and the way that it's been designed to really meet the needs of whether it's enterprises or potentially being the public network for central banks and digital currencies, to potentially anyone on this call who has a startup and a desire to build a secure privacy preserving, fair layer to trust layer to their organization.
Well, I think technologies can't be ignored any longer, really.
Agreed. In what sense do you mean there?
Well, I mean, the the general public, the users of the technology, are aware that there's, vulnerabilities to their data that they're not happy with.
Right. We keep seeing in the news, especially like, because the news doesn't talk about like, oh, there's just cool, like there's a press release from a cool tech company. Like that's not news, right? There needs to be some major adoption or some major new thing that gets the market's attention. And you're right, for many, many, many years, it's just been another announcement of, look, something was breached, or here's millions of records, billions of records. And it's users are starting, there is now not just regulatory drivers for businesses to become compliant, but there's now true market demand from consumers through everyone, through entire markets, who are for more secure, better technology, better ways of assuring that your data will be safe and used in only ways that you intend for it to be used.
Yeah. Like a few years ago, we were told just get used to being tracked all over the internet, being used to your data being the product, and we're not okay with that.
Agreed. And unfortunately, a lot of people in the privacy space, which was much smaller back then, like back then being like, I don't know, let's say 2005, when I got into privacy, and through the whole, as the internet was kind of growing up and more tracking technology was being used, all of a sudden quickly, like Google Analytics became the default, and it's like, well, that's what everyone else is using, so I'm safe using it. And that's people thinking, oh, I'm safe using it from a it's going to work, and I know that the company's going to be there the next day, and it's not a fly-by-night company or whatever. But I've spent years trying to explain to people there are other tools beyond Google Analytics, and I'm not just here to just like trash on Google right now. It's just a good use case about to use, but there are other tools that you could use that give you better accuracy, or at least, let's just say, the same accuracy, if not better, than Google, without the tracking. And if you're a business, why are you sharing your customers' data back to Google for free? Like, they're not paying you for that, right? They're not paying the consumer, and they're not paying the business, but you're sharing it back to them, data about individuals for tracking purposes, just so you can get metrics. And I think you're right. You're absolutely right. There's now like a sea change is happening. And it's kind of wonderful to see, whether it's through DeFi and people wanting to get more out of the system and more equity and feel more democratized, and not necessarily feel like their data is being extracted from them with no compensation or choice about that matter. There's definitely, like, the times right now are so exciting. There is a lot besides Hedera. Even there's just I'm a advisor to the Rise of Privacy Tech, which aims to is an organization that brings together privacy tech founders, as well as investors, VCs, angel networks, and privacy advisors, so that we can help really, like, get this ecosystem vibrant and get a lot more technical solutions that solve for these problems, whether it's zero trust or it's um, you know uh, uh, storing data on devices instead of edge computing, instead of centralized data stores by organizations. I mean, it runs the gamut of solutions of privacy enhancing technologies and everything. There's a vibrant community right now with a lot of companies, like hundreds of companies that are about to launch actually their new tech. So really exciting space, and it's exactly why I left larger companies like Amazon, because I see so much going on in this space and it's ready to take off. And Hedera, I got lucky. Hedera happened to, I don't want to say fall in my lap, but I became aware of it just as I was kind of going through this, change in myself of like, I want to go, work 100% of the time on privacy tech.
Yeah. And I think, I think inherently people aren't adverse to, a so-called passport for COVID, but the concern is like, but who has this data? Where is this data? How secure is my data going to be? These are real use cases for. And Tom, you might be able to talk about that with your NHS experience with healthcare.
Well, even from a UK experience, there were questions in the UK about how's the NHS track and trace system being used. There were all kinds of questions about where that data was going, whether that was going to Google or going to Apple. So, yeah, I think privacy is an interesting question where it's kind of like, it's a bit of I suppose from my perspective, well, not from my perspective, but from a consumer perspective, it's quite hidden. It's like this thing that everybody sort of, I guess, has a feeling of what privacy means to them, but then how that actually applies to business, because, I guess we'll hear about GDPR, and it's just 4 letters, and what does that actually mean? How do these policies that companies implement actually mean that I get greater privacy? It seems to me from a layman's perspective, it's quite an esoteric topic.
Well, the GDPR is so different in different companies, but you know more about that than most, don't you, Debra? I'm not that well versed.
Well, yeah. So GDPR is a EU level regulation, so it applies to all 27. Now 27. Sorry, Tom. EU
okay.
countries. Plus, the UK is kind of rethinking what it should be doing there and how it aligns to how they'll align now to the EU. But there's a lot of challenges businesses have to deal with because what the EU and the US approach privacy differently when it comes to regulation. Traditionally, in the United States, it's been about consumer protection. So you really, in the past, had to show consumer harm. And traditionally, that's been show me your monetary harm or your physical harm, or right? Not just like, oh no, something's known about me. A lot of the case law has been like, well, that's not harm, therefore it doesn't fit within the regulation, or you don't have a right to sue, even you just have a right to tell the regulators that you've been violated and hope they bring an action. So that's changing, of course, but that's just traditionally in the US and how it's treated privacy. In the EU and UK, privacy is a human right, as enshrined in actual. Oh, Christian joined. Great, I got to be on my best behavior. So in the EU, it is a human right. And the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, they view data protection as all of the rules of the road that protect your data from from privacy to data portability to security as well.
Is that the same? Is the GDPR the same in Europe as the UK?
Well,
yeah,
Tom, you could take that one.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know yet if it has in practical terms. It hasn't. We're not thinking of it any differently as well. We're not, certainly. A bit like, I mean, there's a lot of regulations which I think are under question. But when Brexit happened, I know that there was a transition of a lot of laws that went from the EU statute books straight onto the UK statute books. So I guess we could diverge, but given that the EU is still a big market for the UK, I mean, we've got customers in the EU ourselves, so we wouldn't be looking to sort of downrate our privacy regulations just because we've left the EU. And the same with, the same with CE testing. It's another area, different from privacy, but another sort of example of where regulations diverge. But yeah, that does sound different from the different. I wasn't aware of the US was more sort of, I guess, monetary based. That's what constitutes harm. I think I quite like the fact what you said that the UK and the EU, at least at the moment, enshrine that as a human right. That feels kind of right to me, that privacy should be a fundamental right.
Yep.
But what is your definition of privacy, Debra?
Oh, well, it really depends on the audience, because there are a lot of perspectives on this, and so the way I would describe it, and is that it's having the decision to be known or unknown in a particular space, and then having the control over what attributes about you are shared. And so when it comes to businesses, businesses need to think about it as they are stewards of data that is attributed to individuals. And that when you're dealing with privacy, you have to think about it differently from security in several ways. But with security, you're going, I want it. Once I have the security, the data's protected. Well, when you have privacy, the person's protected because the data is protected. And so that's how people need to think about threat modeling for privacy. That's how they should be. Oh, go ahead.
Say that again. You differentiated there, and I think it's important to just say that again.
Sure. With security, you want to make sure that the data is protected, and there's 3 particular goals of security in the industry, and those are confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. Right? If you don't have access to the data, that could be a security issue. Think in the healthcare space, right? So with privacy, it's not just about data. And it is a challenge when talking about privacy and talking about GDPR, which just talks about data protection and not privacy directly, is that, we keep talking about data being protected. But ultimately, the goal that we should be threat modeling for and making sure that we are considering in advance of building threats to the individual, right? We want to make sure that the person is protected and that they don't feel surveilled, or they have choices to, share additional information beyond what's absolutely necessary to collect. And it's transparency, and there's notice, and they have understanding of how the system works. And, right. So in the end, when we talk about having trust, privacy and security are absolutely essential, but they're not the same thing. You need security to have privacy. But you could wholly have a secure system that has no personal data in it. And you don't need privacy in order to have security. But you always need to think about the individual.
And there's all kinds of differentiation as well between, isn't there, sort of what constitutes sensitive information, personal information, and defining what you hold. I know that we have to define sort of what different levels of private information that we hold about individuals. And that has to be enshrined in company policies. And then for people signing up for the system, they have to be fully aware of their rights to their data. And we have to be very clear about how we store that data, where that's stored, and what we do with that data as well.
Right. So so GDPR, which is applicable to any business in the US as well, or any other country, where you're collecting data from EU residents, or somebody who's actually just physically in the EU. They don't even have to be a resident. So this is important for those who are outside the EU as well to know. But there are very strict requirements about documenting your they call it ROPAs, your records of processing activities. So just like Tom was saying, like, who are you sharing? What categories of data are you collecting? Who are you sharing it with? This accounting of data is a legal requirement. Being able to, so there is an entire workflow around how the appropriate ways to process personal data, document it, and you're documenting that specifically for auditors, for your data protection officer that is sometimes legally required to have to review it and be able to. They're kind of like almost like a privacy version of inspector general, right? They're an independent, can't be fired for without cause type of person within an organization that, you know, that can tell you when you're doing your privacy stuff out of compliance, and then kind of make you fix it, and also be there as an educational tool within an organization. But also you're keeping those for in case there's a lawsuit against the company. You're keeping it for regulators in case regulators want to take a look at those at your processing activities. So there's a lot around privacy and data protection beyond what most people talk about. I say you're layperson, but someone who's not as in the weeds as I am. Others just kind of, view privacy as, too narrowly, as like, oh, it's anonymity. Anonymity is privacy, right? We see that in the crypto space. And I think that that's a very, I don't want to say dangerous position to have, but I fully disagree with
kind of
that.
simplistic, right?
Very simplistic and overly simplistic as to ignore all other potential privacy problems that need solving for.
It's interesting you use the term accounting. I guess as a small business owner, you do sort of look at it as, you've got to account for your data, like you've got to account for your finances effectively. You've really got to keep on top of it. And actually, so you have to have a named data protection. I happen to be the named data protection officer for everywhere, which means that, and it's interesting that I guess, is this the same in the US, that you have a named person that they are, actually legally on the hook if you get, no?
No, it's an EU requirement, although some US companies will need a data protection officer because of all the EU data they collect. Yeah.
I mean, in the UK, we had data protection officers before GDPR anyway. I mean, we existed before GDPR, and I was that role beforehand. But
yep.
I was going to say something else. It's gone now.
The EU Data Protection Directive was before the GDPR, so that was at the that was implemented differently in each country in the EU. The regulation is like, consider it like federal law for the EU. So they just kind of made the requirements at the federal level almost.
I think it's an interesting challenge for smaller businesses because it's quite, it's a whole other new thing to think about, right? I mean, just on top of understanding your business finances and all those things, if you're starting a business and you think, right, I've got this great idea, and maybe Charles, this is something that Charles can speak to. You started a business to do something, to achieve something, and then you get into the reality of, well, okay, I've got to meet these statutory requirements for financial accounting, and okay, now I've got to have all these policies for data protection and privacy, and I've got to have cookie policy on my website and all these other things. How do you think that how do we make it easier for smaller businesses to incorporate? You talked about privacy by design earlier. Do you think there's something there that could be made just super simple for small businesses or startups to almost like plug in as okay, this is what you need to do, here are some standard processes?
Yeah, I do. And so we've been talking about privacy by design for many years now, since it was the concept was originated by Dr. Ann Cavoukian, who used to be one of the information commissioners of in Canada, and she's been talking about it for I think over a decade now, with privacy moving from the legal stack, so to speak, down into more engineering, and we're starting to really embark on what does engineering for privacy mean, and how do we build that into our product development process by design. You're starting to see new standards come up, but it is still largely an amorphous concept of 7 principles. Now, there's some great books written that really have kind of dived into this concept of how can you take those principles, break it down, and use some really some academics, some engineers, like PhDs, have kind of come up with some models of ways to approach different strategies and tactics for privacy engineering and privacy by design. But there is actually an ISO standard in development. I was actually vice chair of the U.S. Technology Advisory Group for the privacy by design standard and that will not have any sort of certification behind it, but I think it's going to serve as a really good guideline and standard, basically, for how companies should think about soup to nuts, like even in their marketing, in their product, about keep making sure privacy is embedded in it. So that will eventually, and NIST also has a really good, NIST is the government standards organization in the United States. They've got a really good privacy risk. I forget the exact title, but it goes along with their cybersecurity framework. They've now got like a privacy framework that goes with it. So at least from a risk-based perspective, we can take a look at that. It's not like ISO where you have to buy the standard to view it. It's free, and it's meant to be used as an international standard, even though it was created as by a U.S. body. Usually, their standards are requirements for federal government agencies, but many enterprises end up taking on, and embedding those standards as well into their workflow. So we're going to start seeing more and more of that. And I think, Tom, hopefully, the EU and the UK finally come up with some codes of conduct that are, GDPR allows for different industries to kind of come up with codes of conduct of ways of, if you can then say, like, if the code of conduct has been accepted by the EU Council and the governing bodies there, then you can say, I comply with this, I comply with this industry standard within the GDPR, and so people are like waiting for that to happen. So they're not taking risks by trying to address privacy in a novel way that they're not sure is going to be okay. Instead, like, an entire industry can kind of opine and work against the same ethical standard, but it's all in development right now, right? It's still a work in progress.
Do you think that's where you sort of mentioned privacy tech? Do you think that's where sort of privacy tech companies go to, is actually going from being, where privacy is pretty much a self-certification exercise right now, to actually being able to say, and very sort of hopefully leading into where Hedera might actually become useful in this, is by saying, well, okay, we've got privacy, but we can actually prove it, or more than that, and maybe that's where we actually lead into things like decentralized identity, where you can say, well, privacy, yes, we've got the policies, yes, we can prove it, but actually we've got the technical frameworks built in so that we can actually guarantee it. You have privacy very much by design from front to back, sort of thing.
Yes, I do. I think so. First of all, we've got that trust layer that Hedera provides, right? And I don't think it makes sense to go into all of that on this chat right now, because we have some really aware people on the conversation. But a good example is Acor is a company in the healthcare space. One of the first to build on top of Hedera, and in talking with their CEO. I really got some great privacy assurance use cases there. They've created an ability to for data lineage within the system, and they've also created an ability to like a consent store, where all you're doing is storing, this person consented, this person revoked consent, this person, being able to then at any point in time go back to that trail and point to when consents were legally, given, and when they were revoked, which is under the GDPR. You need to be able to allow revocation for consent of your data. So there are definitely going to be tools built on top of Hedera that make for even more assurances for the system. This is kind of where I'm so excited, because when you start with a great layer of trust, and by making things I don't want to say transparent by design, but kind of like transparent by design, even if they're encrypted, right? Like the concept is that they'll be there, where to get them, that the security's built in, that if a node goes down, it's redundant, right? Like the availability of data is there for those who have the right keys to read it.
I think those tools are going to be really important, because I'm just thinking about, we're quite lucky, I suppose, in a sense, because we basically deal with usernames and passwords. The extent to the privacy that we hold is nothing like what ACOR's using. They're actually, I think they're tracking more sort of medical based records. We're monitoring assets in healthcare environments, so we're on a bit of a different level there. But still, I think with smaller companies, it tends to be the case that, I guess, you get scope creep in your data. It's easy to, you've got to store a bit of information. We need to just put a spreadsheet of users together, for example, and before you know it, you've actually got quite a rich data set, where you might be having, names, email addresses, departments, and it's not, how, and all of a sudden, as a small company, you realize that you've got a big data, a decent sized data set, and actually no individual has consented to that information, or has there been implicit consent, or if somebody actually turned around and made an accusation, how would you prove that? So it's quite, that I think, and maybe I'm sort of belying some of my own sort of personal anxiety about this sort of space, because it is something that plays on my mind. It's like, how do you actually, how would you actually sort of prove some of that if somebody turned around and made an accusation that you are doing the right thing, or it's not just a policy on a piece of paper that says, oh yeah, you can email us and tell us you want to delete your record. Right, or then exactly. What's the impact? And because I guess that's my point, is it's not just the product that you're making, that you're putting out there. It's all the way through your business processes, and I think that's what, for me, you mentioned the lay people, if you like, or the general public, people outside of businesses. It's not just the things that are in the tools; it's the things that are used, for back office payroll processing, yep. Or customer management and things like that. So the integration, if you like, of Hedera in that scenario is going to be pervasive. I mean, if we have privacy tools to deal with all of that, then you can be using decentralized identification services for pretty much everything, which I see that could very well be the future.
I think that's the future I want, and I think that's the future that a lot of people building in the DLT space are hopeful for as well, because you get that zero trust security, right? And I mean, you're able to still freely flow between platforms and take your identity with you almost. And even your data portability is important too. You want to be able, like, it's written into GDPR, and it's a kind of a data protection requirement where you have the right to be able to take your personal data from one platform to another, for obvious reasons, right? Now, the state of whether or not you can fully do that right now across companies is definitely not. It's not mature, right? So we'll be getting.
Well, even if you want to go and update your address with one company, and then you've got to go and update your address with 10 different companies. I long for the day when you can just have one decentralized identity and you update your address, and then all companies know about it.
Wouldn't that be?
And maybe it's even more nuanced than that. Maybe it's all companies know about it, but you left the street address off for some companies that they don't need that for your opinion, but for those who you want to share it with, you can share that. This way you have permission, access to exactly the attributes that you want to share with whomever you think should have those attributes. And I think that's the future. And by locking it down, by standardizing, by using zero trust, by using other models of new ways of preserving privacy. So differential privacy is a data science technique to add noise to a data set so that you could still actually get true data analysis results back without identifying who responded in what particular way. So that's being used a lot for sharing data with third parties where there was maybe no consent or anything, because you don't need consent. You're not sharing individual information. You're just sharing, an overall analysis, input. You're just sharing like the result, the output.
So if you look at it from a global perspective, could the GDPR that's the United Kingdom is developing, could that be, since we're so global, and if anybody in the EU is covered by that, wouldn't all like entities that do business globally have to go to those standards?
Yeah, so that is happening already in the US. The GDPR has been around for a few years now, like in force, like fully in force. And I mean, while it's a slow uptake, even in enterprises, because there's just so much retrofitting that you need to do to to change your business to make it compliant. Well, one of the reasons I like, I like working with startups right now is like you could start from the beginning and architect it right. So like I was doing a lot of compliance in big tech. That's less fun for me than doing the innovation. So my point is, there's a lot more work when you have to clean up your data because you've been a big data, holder for so long, and like that was the trend, and everyone was using everything was SaaS and centralized, and right. So now if we're going towards more of a decentralized world, it's going to take a lot of changes across many ecosystems to finally get there. We're still in its infancy, but GDPR is not new. I do think that smaller companies maybe have been slower to educate themselves on what's necessary. But if they were selling to larger companies, they would realize they would be losing sales because they weren't GDPR compliant. So they're probably in some phase of becoming compliant.
Can I also ask you to differentiate between, for our listeners, to differentiate between encryption and privacy? Like, just because your data is encrypted, that doesn't mean that it's private.
Okay, so there's a lot there. I'm going to unpack. So first, and people do this all the time, so I'm not nitpicking on you, but private is actually a information security term that denotes confidentiality. So remember, security has three goals, and that's confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So when we say that something's private, we mean that it is confidential. It doesn't mean privacy. However, privacy is involved and overlaps with confidentiality, so it's confusing. So let's see, where were we? Privacy. So privacy, we have privacy when we have, security needs to lock down based on the rules we've put in place around information. So encryption is one way to make it unseen from other people who don't hold a key to read it. And that is, so encryption is one way to enforce privacy. What's interesting is that encryption was the default way for anyone to be like, we encrypted it, therefore we have privacy.
Exactly.
And what that's done over time is really limit how you can use the data. Today, there are many companies coming out with really great not just use cases, but with actual tech that allows other companies to use, for instance, homomorphic encryption techniques, where you're actually querying an encrypted data set, but still getting insights out of that encrypted data set. And it never, and it's an actual helpful insights without revealing, the specific data underneath. And I think they do it like through hashes and matching. And I'm not exactly an expert on that.
That sounds like a Lehman topic.
What's that? I'm sorry, Tom?
That sounds like a Lehman topic.
Yeah.
Tom, can you hear me?
Like,
yes, we can hear you.
Who's talking?
Yeah, we can hear you.
And so there's other techniques you can use beyond that, instead of encryption, that can allow you to have value extracted from your data set while still preserving privacy. Whereas encryption, up until the homomorphic encryption stuff, encryption was just kind of
Hello?
like, yes, we could still hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
You can't hear us.
I suppose encryption doesn't mean management, though, does it? So I mean, you can say that you've encrypted the data that you hold of people, but it's certainly, I mean, again, sort of